The apartment smelled like cold coffee and last night's rain tracked in on the soles of our shoes. Dawn hadn't quite decided what it wanted to be yet. The light through the blinds was thin and gray, like it was still negotiating with the dark. I stood at the kitchen counter, one hand resting on the edge, listening to the refrigerator hum and the city wake up in pieces. A car door slamming, a bus sighing at the corner, someone laughing too loudly on the sidewalk below. He came in just after 6. His jacket hit the back of the chair. Keys clinked into the bowl by the door. He didn't look tired. He looked inconvenienced, like sleep had interrupted something more important. I asked where he'd been, not sharply, not accusingly, just the way you ask when you share a life with someone and assume the question belongs to both of you. He didn't pause. Even if I stay out all night, I'm not obligated to explain where I am. The words landed flat and heavy, like a door closing without being slammed. I felt my shoulders still. That familiar instinct kicked in. The one that usually rushes to soften things, to reframe, to make space so the moment doesn't crack open into something worse. I've always been the reliable one. The one who keeps things moving, who absorbs discomfort so the structure doesn't wobble. But something in me didn't reach for that role this time. "Hey," I said. My voice sounded steady, almost curious. "Then neither am I." He looked at me then, finally, eyebrows lifting as if he were waiting for the rest of the argument to arrive. It didn't. Silence settled between us, not awkward, just complete. He scoffed once, grabbed a glass of water and went into the bedroom without another word. The door closed softly behind him, more careless than angry. I stayed where I was. "My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 30 years old." I stood at that counter longer than I needed to, staring at a faint crack in the wall tile I'd meant to fix for months. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain and electricity. I thought about how many conversations we'd had that ended this way. Him drawing a line, me stepping back from it to keep the peace. How often independence had been used as a shield instead of a shared understanding. When I finally moved, it wasn't dramatic. I rinsed my mug. I wiped the counter. I sat at the small table by the window and opened my laptop, the screen lighting up my hands in a pale blue glow. An email sat at the top of my inbox, unread but not unconsidered. The job offer. Another country. Another time zone. A role I'd been planning to turn down because it would be complicated. Because we would be complicated. Because starting over somewhere else felt selfish when I was already holding so many things together here. I told myself I was being practical. Loyal. Sensible. The city outside continued its morning routine. A delivery truck idled. Someone dragged a suitcase across the sidewalk. Life moving regardless of who explained themselves to whom. I opened the email and reread the details. Salary. Start date. Relocation support. The words felt different now, sharper, more real, like they'd been waiting for this exact moment to be understood. I remembered the interview. How the manager had spoken about trust, about autonomy paired with accountability. How he'd asked what I needed to do my best work and actually listened to the answer. A memory drifted in without warning. Me months earlier checking my phone at midnight, wondering if I was allowed to ask where he was without being accused of control. Me rehearsing sentences that wouldn't sound like demands. Me editing myself for the sake of calm. The reliable one. Always adjusting. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. In through my nose. Out through my mouth. The hum of the refrigerator steadied me, an anchor in the ordinary. I realized then that his statement hadn't just been about last night. It had been a declaration of terms. One I'd been following without ever agreeing to. I clicked accept. The confirmation screen popped up almost instantly, cheerful and efficient. "We're excited to have you on the team." Confetti graphics I hadn't expected drifted briefly across the screen before settling into a clean receipt of my decision. I didn't feel giddy. I didn't feel afraid. I felt aligned. I closed the laptop and sat there, hands folded, listening to the apartment breathe. From the bedroom I could hear him moving around, drawers opening, the muffled sound of a shower starting. He was still living his morning, confident that the ground beneath us hadn't shifted. I didn't go in to tell him. I didn't send a message. I didn't announce anything at all. Some decisions don't need witnesses to be real. Outside, the light finally changed, softening into something almost hopeful. The city carried on, unaware that my life had just tilted onto a different axis. I finished my coffee, now cold, and stood up, feeling the day settle into place around me. Whatever came next would come. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't planning my response around someone else's rules. He slept through most of the morning. I knew because the apartment stayed quiet in that particular way it only does when someone is resting without concern. No careful footsteps, no checking the time, no sense of urgency pressing against the walls. I moved around him gently anyway, habit guiding my body even after my mind had stepped somewhere else. Old patterns don't disappear just because you notice them. I showered, the water hot enough to fog the mirror, and watched my reflection blur until my face softened into something unfamiliar. Steam filled the bathroom, carrying the faint smell of eucalyptus soap and warm tile. I breathed it in slowly, grounding myself in sensation. When you're about to change something big, your body always knows first. When I came out, he was awake, scrolling through his phone on the edge of the bed, towels slung low around his waist, hair still damp. He didn't look up right away. He never did. Attention in this apartment was something you earned by not asking for it. "What are you doing today?" he asked finally, casual, uninvested. "Work," I said, which was true enough. Just not the whole truth. He nodded and went back to his screen. No follow-up. No curiosity. That absence settled over me more clearly than any argument could have. I realized how often I'd mistaken silence for peace, distance for independence. He hadn't just stayed out all night. He'd stayed out of the relationship too, confident I'd remain where he left me. I packed my bag with deliberate care. Passport slipped into the inner pocket like it had been waiting there. The weight felt different against my shoulder as I zipped the bag closed. Heavier but steadier. I paused at the doorway and looked back at the bedroom. He hadn't noticed. Or maybe he had and didn't think it mattered. Outside, the air was cleaner, washed by last night's rain. The sidewalk smelled faintly of wet leaves and car exhaust, the city alive in its mid-morning rhythm. I walked to the cafe on the corner instead of heading straight to the office, needing space to let the decision settle without interruption. The bell above the door chimed softly as I went in. Coffee grounds, warm milk, toasted bread, ordinary comforts anchoring me to the present. I sat by the window and opened my laptop again, this time not to doubt myself but to prepare. I read through the onboarding packet, filled out forms, chose a start date that felt ambitious but possible. Each click tightened something that had been loose in me for years. I wasn't running away. I was moving toward something. A memory drifted in as I typed, me earlier in the relationship, explaining why I needed to know plans, not to control him but to feel included. Him smiling, saying I worried too much. Him assuring me that freedom mattered more than schedules. Me nodding, swallowing the discomfort because I didn't want to be the person who clipped someone else's wings. I'd clipped my own instead. My phone buzzed. A message from him. "You still mad?" I stared at it, the simplicity almost impressive. No acknowledgement of what he'd said. No curiosity about my morning. Just a question that reframed everything as my emotional overreaction. The reliable one was expected to reset the room. I typed a response and deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Finally, I locked the screen and turned the phone face down. I wasn't obligated to explain where I was, or where I was going. He'd made that clear. At work, the day unfolded like any other. Meetings. Emails. A joke shared in the hallway. No one noticed anything different about me, and that felt strangely reassuring. Life doesn't pause for personal revolutions. It keeps offering you normalcy while you decide who you're becoming. During lunch, I stepped outside and called my mother. Not for permission. For grounding. We talked about nothing important. The weather, a recipe she'd tried, a neighbor's dog. I didn't tell her about the job yet. Some truths need to sit with you before you pass them on. Back at my desk, I booked a one-way flight. The confirmation email arrived seconds later, bright and decisive. I closed my eyes for a moment and felt my heart thud once, solid and present. Fear flickered at the edges, but it didn't take over. It never does when the choice is right. That evening, when I returned to the apartment, he was already there, sprawled on the couch, television on, shoes kicked off without care. He glanced at me and smiled like nothing had happened, like the morning hadn't split something open. "What's for dinner?" he asked. I set my bag down slowly. The apartment smelled like reheated leftovers and the cologne he wore when he wanted to feel untouchable. I realized then that he assumed I would feed him, literally and figuratively, because I always had. "I'm not sure," I said. And for once, the uncertainty wasn't a weakness. It was honest. I went into the bedroom and closed the door, not to punish him, not to provoke a reaction, but to create space. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my suitcase, still empty, waiting. The decision I'd made that morning hadn't echoed yet. It would. Big choices always do. But right now it lived quietly inside me, firm and unshakable. I wasn't obligated to explain where I'd been. And soon I wouldn't be obligated to stay. The silence between us stretched over the next few days, not loud enough to demand attention, but dense enough to alter the air in every room. He moved through the apartment like nothing fundamental had shifted. Coffee brewed on autopilot, keys tossed in the bowl, his shoes left wherever he happened to step out of them. He asked questions that didn't require answers and offered comments that assumed agreement. I watched all of it from a slight distance, like someone observing a familiar routine after learning the trick behind it. I packed slowly. Not all at once. Not dramatically. A sweater here. A pair of shoes there. I folded clothes with care, smoothing out wrinkles, deciding what deserved the limited space of a suitcase and what could be left behind without grief. The bedroom smelled faintly of laundry detergent and his cologne, a mix that had once felt like home and now felt borrowed. Each item I set aside carried a memory, some warm, some cautionary, but none of them stopped my hands. I've always been the reliable one. The one who doesn't rush. The one who plans. The one who thinks through consequences before anyone else has to. That part of me was still present, just redirected. Reliability, I realized, didn't have to mean staying. Could also mean following through on yourself. A memory drifted in while I folded a dress I hadn't worn in months. Me standing in this same room before, apologizing for asking questions. Me accepting answers that closed doors instead of opening conversations. Me believing that independence meant emotional distance because that's how he defined it. I'd accepted his rules as neutral facts rather than choices that benefited him. He noticed the suitcase on the third day. "Going somewhere?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe, tone light, amused. He glanced at the bag like it was a prop, not a possibility. "Yes," I said. I didn't add anything else. He laughed once. "For work?" "Yes," I said again. He nodded and walked away, already finished with the exchange. The lack of curiosity wasn't accidental. It was insurance. As long as he didn't ask, nothing had to change. That night, I lay awake listening to the apartment settle. The pipes clicking, the elevator whining somewhere below, the distant siren slicing the dark and fading again. He slept easily beside me, breath steady, confident in the permanence of my presence. I stared at the ceiling and felt a strange tenderness for the version of myself who had once believed love was supposed to feel like this kind of restraint. In the morning I booked movers. Just for my things. A small truck. A short window. Practical details that anchored the abstract decision into the physical world. The confirmation email landed in my inbox with the quiet authority of something already in motion. At work, I told my manager I'd be leaving. She congratulated me without surprise, like she'd seen this coming before I had. We talked timelines. Handoffs. Clean endings. I appreciated the professionalism, the respect. It struck me how easy it was to be treated well once you stopped negotiating your worth. That evening I cooked dinner for one. The sizzle of oil in the pan filled the kitchen, grounding me in the present. I ate at the small table by the window, watching the city glow into night. When he came in, he noticed the empty second plate and frowned. "You didn't make enough," he said. "I didn't plan to," I replied. He looked at me, then really looked, and something like confusion flickered across his face. He asked if something was wrong. The question came late, and it came without urgency. I thought about explaining. About laying out months of small cuts and quiet accommodations. About reminding him of his own words, that he wasn't obligated to explain where he was. I thought about how often I'd translated his indifference into freedom and my concern into neediness. "No," I said. "Nothing's wrong." It wasn't the answer he expected. He waited for more. I stood up, rinsed my plate, and left the kitchen without offering it. The next day the movers came while he was out. The apartment filled with the sound of tape ripping and boxes sliding across the floor. I directed them calmly, pointing, confirming, checking off items on a list I'd prepared. When they were done, the space felt larger and emptier at the same time. My absence already visible. I left the key on the counter. I didn't leave a note. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Anything I wrote would be interpreted as an opening for debate, an invitation to rewrite the narrative. I wasn't obligated to explain where I was, or why I was going. Outside, the air was bright and decisive. The city moved around me, unaware and unbothered, offering sidewalks and traffic lights and the simple permission to keep walking. I checked my phone once. No messages yet. That would change. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the building one last time. Not with anger, not with nostalgia, but with understanding. Some places teach you who you were. Others teach you who you can't keep being. I felt the ground steady beneath me as the road opened up. Whatever came next would demand honesty. From him. From me. From the life I was about to step into. And for the first time, I wasn't carrying anyone else's rules with me. The new city greeted me with rain that felt intentional, like it had been scheduled in advance to wash the edges off everything I thought I knew. The airport smelled like polished floors and burnt espresso. Voices overlapped in accents I couldn't place yet. I stood still for a moment with my suitcase upright beside me, palm resting on the handle, letting the fact of my arrival settle into my body. No one was waiting for me. That, I realized, was the point. The apartment the company arranged was small but clean, all sharp corners and neutral colors. Light filtered in through tall windows, gray and patient. I unpacked slowly, placing objects with care, deciding where each version of my life would live now. My passport went into a drawer by the door. My laptop on the desk. My clothes into a closet that smelled faintly of fresh paint and nothing else. Silence here felt different. Not loaded. Not corrective. Just open. My phone buzzed for the first time that evening while I was boiling water for pasta. His name lit up the screen, followed by 3 missed calls in quick succession. Then a text. "Where are you?" I stared at it while the water rolled into a steady boil, steam fogging the window above the sink. The timing felt almost poetic. He hadn't noticed my absence until it became inconvenient. Until the silence stopped working in his favor. Another message arrived. "This isn't funny. Call me." I turned the stove down and sat at the small table, phone in my hand. For a moment the old reflex stirred. The urge to explain, to soothe, to make sure he understood I wasn't trying to hurt him. I've always been the reliable one. The one who closes loops so others don't sit with discomfort. But reliability doesn't mean self-erasure. I know that now. I typed a response and erased it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Finally, I locked the screen and placed the phone face down. I ate my dinner slowly, tasting garlic and salt and something like relief. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass, steady and indifferent. Over the next few days the messages escalated. Confusion turned into anger. Anger softened into bargaining. He accused me of overreacting, of being dramatic, of blindsiding him. He asked why I hadn't talked to him first. The irony almost made me smile. He'd made the rules clear. Explanations were optional. I was simply living inside the terms he'd set. At work my days filled quickly. Meetings that mattered. Colleagues who listened. A manager who asked for my opinion and waited for the answer. The office smelled like printer toner and strong coffee. I learned new systems, new rhythms. I went home tired in a way that felt earned, not depleted. One evening, walking back from the grocery store, I passed a row of restaurants spilling warm light onto the sidewalk. Laughter drifted out. Cutlery clinked. Life unapologetically ongoing. A memory surfaced. Me months ago, checking my phone at midnight, wondering if I was allowed to ask where someone was. The distance between that version of me and this one felt vast and quiet and earned. He called again that night. I answered. Not immediately. Not impulsively. I waited until my breathing was steady, until the decision to pick up felt like a choice rather than a reflex. "Where are you?" he demanded, skipping greetings. "I'm safe," I said. The words felt intentional. Sufficient. "You just left," he said. "You don't do that to someone." I thought about all the nights he'd stayed out, the explanations withheld, the confidence that I would remain exactly where he left me. I thought about the job offer I'd almost rejected. About how close I'd come to shrinking my life to preserve his comfort. "You told me you weren't obligated to explain where you were," I said evenly. I listened. Silence stretched on the line. Not the kind that invites fixing. The kind that forces reckoning. He said I was being unfair. He said this wasn't how partnerships worked. He said I owed him a conversation. "I'm having one," I replied. I'm just not negotiating it. When the call ended, my hands didn't shake. I sat by the window and watched the rain slow, the city lights reflecting in the wet pavement like scattered stars. I felt something close to grief, not for him exactly, but for the years I'd spent confusing endurance with love. If you've ever been told independence means never asking questions, you know how lonely that version of freedom feels. Some relationships survive on imbalance because no one names it. Weeks passed. The messages dwindled. My life here expanded. I found a cafe that knew my order. A park where I liked to sit on Sundays. A quiet confidence in my own decisions that didn't require validation. I didn't move countries to punish him. I moved because staying would have punished me. One evening, unpacking the last box, I found a note I'd written to myself months ago, folded and forgotten. Don't abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. I smiled and threw it away. I didn't need the reminder anymore. The rain returned softly that night, tapping the window like punctuation. I turned off the lights and stood in the dark, feeling grounded in a way I never had before. I hadn't disappeared. I had arrived. I chose myself without apology.